listen carefully, because there are houses that seem unshakable. There are loves that seem eternal. Yet just one glance from an outsider, just one whispered word in the ear, and everything can shatter, like a thin fishing net spread across the sea. Just a single tear is enough. The waves and storms can rip the whole net apart, carrying away dreams and happiness along with it. This story did not happen in some faraway land. It took place in a small fishing village on the coast of Maine, America, in the early years of the 20th century. A village of low wooden houses, their roofs faded and brittle from the sea salt, of docks swaying with the rhythm of the tide, and of seagulls circling and crying across the deep blue sky. There, people were used to living with the smell of dried fish, used to hearing the waves crash day and night, and used to believing that as long as they worked hard, any storm would pass and life would eventually return to peace. People often spoke of a man named David Fisher. He was not wealthy, nor did he own anything beyond his calloused hands, an old wooden boat, and a kind heart. Every morning, before the sun even touched the ocean's surface, David rowed his boat out to sea. The salty wind lashed his face, the waves rocked his boat, his hands burned red from the ropes and the salt water, yet his eyes always lit up with the thought of his young wife waiting for him at home. That wife's name was Emily. She was one of the most beautiful young women in the village, with long, soft brown hair and a face as bright as the morning sun. Many men had dreamed of marrying her, yet Emily chose David, the poorest and hardest working man of all. The village had been surprised, some even scoffed, but Emily only smiled gently. He has no gold or silver, but he has an honest heart. The couple lived in a small wooden house, furnished with nothing but a few rough chairs, a crude table, and a creaking bamboo bed. When the rains came, water dripped through the roof onto the floor. When winter arrived, the sea winds whistled through the cracks in the door. But that home was always filled with laughter, filled with the smell of the fish stew Emily cooked, and filled with the belief that as long as they loved each other, every hardship could turn into sweetness. But their peace did not last long. For at the village market, where fishermen brought their catches to sell each morning, there was a wealthy and notoriously cunning man. His name was Mr. Collins. People said Collins not only traded fish, but also traded away people's trust. He would buy fish cheaply, sell them at high prices, and never missed a chance to flaunt his wealth. In the noisy, crowded mornings at the market, his booming voice always drowned out the other sellers. Money is power. Anyone who wants to live in comfort must know how to follow the right man. Collins had had his eye on Emily for a long time. Her beauty and purity stirred his desire, but her choice to marry a poor man like David had irritated him, even insulted him. And a man like Collins, once he wanted something, would not easily let it go. One morning, while David was selling fish at the market, Collins strode up, his eyes prying. He grabbed a fish David had just caught, lifted it up, and spoke loudly before the crowd. "David, your fish may be fresh, but do you think your wife is happy, wearing the same old dresses, tying the same faded scarves? A man who truly loves his wife will know how to give her better than that." The words cut like a knife. The crowd erupted in laughter. Some whispered, some nodded. David's face flushed red, and his heart ached. He wanted to speak back, but his throat was too tight. All he could do was clench his fists and watch Collins walk away, leaving behind that bitter laughter carried off by the sea wind. That evening, when David returned home, Emily still smiled as she welcomed him. But her eyes dimmed slightly when she glanced at her own patched dress reflected in the cracked mirror. She said nothing, yet David noticed the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, as the ocean whispered outside the door. David lay still beside his wife, his eyes wide open in the dark. In his mind, Collins's words echoed endlessly. A man who truly loves his wife will know how to give her better than that. He wondered, was he too powerless? Was love alone not enough from that day forward, in every step, in every glance, in every word? Collins's shadow hung above him like a dark cloud. David worked harder, rowed farther, and tried to bring home more fish. Yet it seemed as if the sea itself was testing him rough waves, fewer fish, broken boats. Meanwhile, Collins still appeared at the market, still made his sly remarks, still sowed words into the ears of the crowd and into Emily's heart that could shake anyone's faith. That was the moment the conflict began. A love once as pure as the morning sea now tasted bitter with doubt. And from that small turning point, a chain of harsh trials was about to descend, pulling David and Emily into a storm of love, money, and merciless tests. From that shameful day at the market, David and Emily's lives seemed to be covered in a heavy fog. Mr. Collins's words echoed in David's head, tearing at his heart. Each time he saw Emily sitting under the oil lamp, mending clothes or folding the old, worn scarf, a sharp pain pierced him. He wished he could bring his wife something better, but could his calloused hands and fragile wooden boat truly stand against fate? Collins, meanwhile, grew more cunning. He did not stop at mocking words in the crowded market, but began sowing seeds of doubt in Emily's heart through 3 cruel tricks. The first time. Collins came to their doorstep, holding a white veil. The evening light made the thin fabric look like a wisp of cloud. He sneered, "A beauty like you should not cover her head with old rags. This matches your face better." Emily grew flustered, refusing him, yet her eyes lingered a moment on the veil. Standing beside her, David felt his heart clench. That brief glance was enough for him to know his wife's heart had faltered, even if only for a moment. David clung to labor as if it was salvation. The next day, he rowed farther out, braving rough waves, hoping to catch more fish. But the sea mocked him, yielding only a few scattered ones. He came back empty-handed, haunted by the image of that veil drifting in his thoughts. The second time, Collins appeared again, this time carrying a pearl necklace, each bead glistening like frozen drops of water. He placed it on their worn wooden table, his voice dripping like honey. "David may bring home fish, but will he ever bring you something as precious as this? You deserve more." Emily. David's fury erupted. He flung the necklace to the floor. "Get out of my house, Collins." "My wife does not need your pity." Collins left, but he left behind a crack in Emily's heart. When the door closed, she broke into sobs. "David, I don't need a necklace, but I am so tired. I don't want to forever mend torn clothes, eat dried fish, and live under the pitying eyes of others." David froze. He longed to hold her, to swear that his love alone could erase all their hardships. But seeing Emily's tear-streaked face, he felt powerless. The third time, Collins struck his cruelest blow. He approached David at the market, his whisper like poison poured into his ear. "There is a spell to summon fish. For those who know, casting the net once brings schools of fish rushing in. I hold that secret. But you must understand, nothing comes free." David went numb. He knew well the price Collins sought was not money, but Emily herself. From that day, sleepless nights consumed him. He dreamed of seas overflowing with fish, of Emily wearing the veil and the pearl necklace, of their wooden hut transformed into a bright, warm home. But intertwined with those dreams was Collins, standing beside his wife with a triumphant smile. Each dream was a wound. Emily, too, began to change. At first, she burned with anger and hatred toward Collins, but as she watched her husband return day after day with an empty boat, saw their hut hold nothing but dried fish and sea salt, her heart wavered. "One night," she whispered through sobs. "David, you said you would bring me happiness. But what kind of happiness is it when all we have is poverty? I love you, but I can't go on exhausting myself in this lack forever." David sat silent, his hands trembling on his knees. He wanted to scream that he had given all he had, that his love was everything, but his throat locked tight, and no words could escape. Collins, patient as a wolf, needed only a few more words to dig deeper. A real man would never let his wife suffer like this. And so, day by day, hour by hour, the distance between David and Emily widened, like a long crack splitting the hull of a boat. The breaking point came on a stormy night. David returned, soaked to the bone, his boat empty, his hands bleeding from the ropes. Inside the dim wooden hut, Emily sat in silence. Before her lay the white veil Collins had sent through another's hand. She had not worn it, yet she had not burned it either. When David's eyes fell on the veil, silence smothered the room. Then Emily's sobs burst forth. "I am so tired. David, I don't want to live like this anymore." David collapsed into a chair, clutching his head. He felt as small as a lost boat tossed between towering waves, with no shore in sight. And that was the turning point when their conflict reached its peak, and no way out seemed possible. That stormy night felt like the final blade cutting into David's heart. He sat numbly inside the dark wooden house, listening to the rain lash against the walls, hearing Emily's muffled sobs, and feeling as if a boulder weighed on his chest. All this time, he had only known how to keep trying, only how to throw himself into the sea to search for fish, forgetting that some wounds did not come from material scarcity, but from the words of doubt driven deep into the heart. In that desperate moment, the poisonous whisper of Mr. Collins suddenly echoed in his head. There is a spell to call the spirit fish. At first, David had brushed it off, thinking it was just a deceitful trick. But now, when love itself stood on the brink of collapse, he had no choice but to try his luck. At dawn, while the storm winds still raged, David quietly rowed his boat out to sea. The waves churned violently, yet he did not falter. In the vast emptiness, he stood on his boat, his trembling hands pressed together, and prayed. "Oh, spirit fish, if you are real, please hear me. I do not ask for gold or silver, nor for riches. I only ask to hold on to the wife who is slipping away because of poverty. Please grant me the strength to prove this love." At first, the sea only answered with its roaring waves. But then, something strange occurred. The surface of the water shimmered with light as silver fish flashed up from the depths, circling the boat. They crowded, rushing into the nets as if they understood his words. In just moments, the boat's hold overflowed with fish, so many that David sank down trembling, tears mixing with the rain. "Thank you, spirit fish. Thank you." He turned the boat back toward shore. When it reached the dock, the entire village poured out, marveling like never before. No one has ever caught this many fish. It's a miracle, but David paid no attention to the praises. His eyes were fixed only on the small house where Emily waited. When he laid the fresh, glistening fish before his wife, Emily froze, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. "David, you really did this." David took her hand, his calloused palm quivering with emotion. "Not for money, not for the world. All of this is for you. I would rather battle storms than ever sell you to Collins. I only want you to believe that this love is stronger than anything." Emily burst into tears and lay her head on his shoulder. In that moment, she suddenly understood that veils, pearl necklaces, or hollow promises of a wealthy life could never compare to the embrace of her husband's arms. Yet joy had barely settled when Collins appeared. When he heard that David had caught such an immense haul of fish, he flew into a rage. He stormed into the market, his face red, his voice shrieking louder than the crashing waves. "Don't believe him. He deceived you. Those fish were mine. David stole them from me." The crowd murmured, some doubtful, others shaking their heads. Collins lunged forward, trying to snatch the catch from David's hands. But this time, David was no longer the poor man who stayed silent. He stood tall, his eyes blazing, his voice booming like thunder. "When you said I was poor, I stayed silent. When you mocked me, I endured. But you will never insult the love between my wife and me. These fish are a gift from the sea, proof of my faith and my strength. You have money, you have schemes, but you will never have Emily." Those words silenced the marketplace. Collins gaped, furious, but before he could reply, something terrifying happened. A massive wave suddenly crashed onto the shore, sweeping away Collins's stall. All the gold and jewels he had hoarded were dragged into the water. Collins fell headlong, flailing in the muddy flood, his screams ringing with despair. People stood frozen, then began to whisper, "The spirit fish has shown its wrath. This is punishment for greed." From that day, Collins lost everything and never dared to approach David and Emily again. He lived in shame, shunned by the entire village. As for David and Emily, after all the storms, they finally found each other again. They were not wealthy. Their wooden house still leaked when it rained, but it was always filled with laughter. Emily no longer needed veils or pearls, for she knew that true happiness was simply sitting by David's side at the hearth, eating fragrant grilled fish and listening to the waves outside their door. The villagers often retold this story, passing it down from generation to generation. They said the sea indeed held a spirit fish, but only those who were genuine and steadfast in love would be blessed. They repeated David's words, treating them as an oath to the sea, "I may be poor, but I will never let love be traded away." And so, through the countless tempests of life, the story of the poor fisherman and his faithful wife lived on like a lighthouse, guiding those lost in temptation. True love is always the greatest strength, and the greedy and deceitful will, in the end, face their retribution.